So a question I get asked often is, what about the near-death experiences that have to do with hell? The hellish, the negative near-death experiences. What about those? Because I've taught a lot on how there is no hell, there is no place in the afterlife of eternal punishment, like we find in some of the different traditions today, especially in mainstream Christianity. This notion of a dualistic afterlife where you live for however long and then you face some kind of judgment, and then you've got two options. You're either sent to hell or you're granted access into heaven, and both places are eternal and both places are, in essence, inescapable. And so I've taught a lot about this. I've made videos on this, and so if you're interested in learning more about it, I'll put some of the links to those videos in the description below. But like I said, today I'm addressing the question about near-death experiences and what I think is actually going on when people claim to have these kinds of experiences. And so one of the things that I started doing when I was still a Christian, when I was a Christian fundamentalist, was I started to become really intrigued with the afterlife and with these different near-death experiences. Now, when I first started looking into this stuff, I was mainly looking at the stories that Christians were telling from their near-death experiences, and this was solidifying my own beliefs about the afterlife. It was giving me assurance and confidence and hope, and so that's why I would listen to them. But then I started to hear about these other stories, these other near-death experiences from people who weren't Christian, or maybe they were Christian, but then after the experience, they had a change in belief on religion and God and all of these different things. And so when I started to hear about some of these stories, and I was watching videos about this, about these stories, and I was reading some books about these different stories, as a Christian, hearing and reading all of this, I became extremely worried. Why? Because now I had to face many experiences, many different stories of people having near-death experiences that went against my theology, that went against my belief structure of what I was taught and what I believed the afterlife was like. And so I had to do something with this, and I didn't really know what to do except dismiss it as, this is something that they're making up, or they're being deceived by the devil. I had all these like programmed knee-jerk responses that would just come up that I heard from other people in my spiritual community that was almost like a way to protect myself. You know, it was a defense mechanism against any kind of theology, any kind of belief structure that was going against what I was holding to be absolutely true. And so as I would do this study, I got to a place where I said, okay, I have to be honest with myself. Like, I really need to become more open, and I really need to start considering some other possibilities with these other stories that are not aligning with my preconceived notions of what the afterlife is like, because this can't be the case. There's no way that there's hundreds of people or thousands of people that are having near-death experiences, that these experiences are contrary to my beliefs of the afterlife, and so all these people must be making their stories up, or they all must be deceived or something. Like, that can't be the case. There has to be something more to it. And so when I got to a place of saying, you know what, I'm going to be okay with possibly being wrong about this. I'm going to be okay with being open-minded, being honest, and being willing to change my mind if necessary. And when I got to that place and I started to really examine many of these different stories for myself, and I was being open and honest, I was amazed, because what I discovered was that the majority of these near-death experiences are positive. And there are many similarities and consistencies among the different near-death experiences. And one of the things I learned was that people were having near-death experiences all over the world, and while there were consistencies and similarities, and I'll get into those, there were also many differences. And this was the part that was really worrying me as a Christian at the time, as a fundamentalist, because I was like, well, wait a second, how in the world are these people having these experiences that don't align with meeting Jesus on the throne and having this judgment like I find in the Bible. Like, why are these people experiencing this stuff? And what these people were experiencing, in essence, was they were encountering the religious figure that maybe they were worshiping on earth, or like however they believed the afterlife would be like, that's what they ended up experiencing on the other side. And so there was that. So I was like, how is this happening? Like, why isn't everyone meeting Jesus? Like, that's supposed to happen for everyone because that's what I believe. Why isn't everyone experiencing that when they have these near-death experiences? And so this became, like I said, super problematic for me. But at the time, like I said, I was trying my hardest to be open-minded and to really understand what was going on in these experiences. And the one thing that really captivated me, now I'm getting to the similarities and the consistencies among these different stories, was that it was almost like in the positive experiences that I was reading about and studying, it was almost like no matter who the person was encountering in their near-death experience, whether it was God, the Father, Jesus, Buddha, Krishna, whoever, it was like the being that they were encountering was this expression and embodiment of unconditional love. And that's something that so many people talk about when they have these near-death experiences, is they say that they feel this ineffable sense of unconditional love and peace and joy. And typically it's being expressed from a being that they're encountering. Sometimes it's an angel, sometimes it's just this figure of light that's glowing and they can't really identify like who the being is. It's just this being that's full of love. And so this is something that happens a lot. And then there's these consistencies where people will typically encounter loved ones that have passed away, friends that have passed away, and there's this connection. A lot of times there's like forgiveness, there's things that are worked out, and there's this sense of relief. And a lot of times people talk about having some kind of like life review, but it's not like this punishment. It's for learning. It's for like seeing all the things that you did in your life, knowing that because everything is one, because everything is interconnected, what you were doing to others, you were actually doing to yourself. So it's this moment of awakening. It's this moment of realization of, oh my goodness, like, you know, this is actually true. We are all one, and I need to start loving my neighbor as myself with the recognition that my neighbor is myself. And so there's all these takeaways and profound insights that come away from the experience. And so many times this happens a lot. The main takeaway, the main lesson is it's all about love. Source, God, whatever you want to call it, is love. And fundamentally, this is the essence of our being. This is our true nature, love. And this is what it's all about. And so when the person comes back to earth and they're living in their physical body again, this is what, like, all of a sudden they have this new mission, they have this new calling, this new purpose, and it's to embody and express this unconditional divine love to the world around them so that the world can experience healing and transformation. And again, in many of these different experiences and stories, the name of the religious figure is different, or sometimes there's no name. Sometimes there's this ultimate realization like God can't be named. God is beyond words and ideas, and so God is ineffable. But it doesn't matter because the experience like transcends and supersedes like any kind of need to have some kind of correct theology figured out and to have that as the main takeaway from the near-death experience, okay? So that happens a lot. However, there are some instances of a negative near-death experience or a hellish near-death experience. And by the way, if you're interested in learning more about the afterlife and how it actually works from an interesting perspective, I really recommend reading The Autobiography of a Yogi by Paramahansa Yogananda. And in chapter 43, there's a really interesting take on how the other side works, the different planes, the astral plane, the causal plane, and what that even means. And it's really interesting. I highly recommend it. But anyway, one of the things I've learned from studying from different teachers and sages like Yogananda and people that have just profound insights of the other side and how consciousness works and how it continues and all of that, is one of the things that happens when you're transitioning from this earth plane into the astral plane, is what they call it, sometimes, is in the early stages of the near-death experience. What tends to happen, and this makes sense, this explains why so many people encounter the afterlife like they believe the afterlife was going to be like, or this explains why so many people encounter the religious figure that they were worshiping on earth. What happens is, in the early stages of the near-death experience, the person is experiencing, much of what the person is experiencing is some kind of projection, some kind of expression from their subconscious, okay? And so their subconscious minds are basically creating this experience, creating these different encounters and the appearances of certain beings in the early stages of the near-death experience. But then what happens is, depending on how long someone is on the other side and how much they experience, typically what the subconscious mind is creating in the experience, that starts to fade away the longer someone, a being, a soul, is on the other side. And the truth, which is unconditional love, non-judgment, source, the truth behind whatever the subconscious mind is trying to understand and interpret in the early stages of the near-death experience, is starting to dissipate. Like I said, the longer someone stays on the other side, and then they just encounter and experience that love, and they start to experience what's actually going on the astral plane. But so much of it, like I said, is directly connected to the subconscious mind. And it's very similar to like when we have dreams at night, because we know that when we have dreams at night, a lot of times what's going on is our subconscious minds are creating these dreamlike experiences, and they're very real. They're very real. They're movie-like, and it seems like that when we're having the dream that this is reality. But is it? Or is it just the subconscious mind taking our deepest fears and anxieties and different beliefs and trauma and turning those different feelings and emotions into a movie-like, a dream-like experience that seems very real? So in the case of a near-death experience, I believe that if someone actually believes that there is a very horrific place called hell in the afterlife, then yeah, someone could experience that in the early stages of their near-death experience. It doesn't actually mean that that is what the afterlife is like. It just means that their subconscious mind is creating that experience in that in-between phase as they're starting to wake up in the astral plane, and that's what they're experiencing in the early stages of that. And they may, encounter or experience like a devilish figure or something, that happens sometimes, because again, this is a projection of what they believe to be true about the afterlife and about the other side. So there's that. But then also what I think can happen is if there's some fear, some pain, and like I said, anxiety, trauma, all these different negative emotions, what can happen is when that transition happens and they're starting to awaken on the other side, they're starting to experience the other side. What happens is, just like I said, just like with a dream, those deep subconscious fears and worries and trauma can create some kind of a negative, hellish experience of whatever. And this can look different for each person. But then the mind interprets this negative, hellish, nightmare experience as, oh, this must be hell, or this must be, whatever. But that's just the mind interpreting what the subconscious mind is projecting and expressing as some kind of dreamlike, movie-like experience on the other side, which is just a projection. It's just some kind of expression, some kind of manifestation of the person's deep, unresolved trauma or fear. And then they come back and they start to interpret that through their own minds and their own experiences and their own beliefs and their own indoctrination, and then they create some kind of story based upon the interpretation of the experience of what the subconscious mind was doing in the early stages of their near-death experience. So that's another thought, that's another possibility. But I do think that regardless, it's important for us to read all of these stories or to listen to all of these stories with an open mind and to treat them like what they are, which, they're subjective experiences. And we have to ask the question, like, are we going to allow someone else's subjective experience to determine what is the objective truth for us? That's the question that we have to wrestle with. And so, yeah, this is the thing with near-death experiences. Like I said, there's so many of them, and there's so many differences on the details, but there's also many consistencies and similarities. So I think, like I said, it's good to study them, it's good to research them, and we can understand that people are experiencing different things for different reasons. But ultimately, when it comes down to, determining whether or not this story or this experience is exactly what the person is claiming it to be, and allowing that to determine what is the truth for us, that's something else. That's another question that we really have to ask ourselves, and we have to be honest with ourselves. And ultimately, if it doesn't resonate with you, if you feel like something's off with it, then just set it aside and move on. So that's my take. That's kind of how I view these stories and experiences. And I'm not saying that, again, like, I'm not here to tell you, okay, what is right and what is wrong. This is something that you have to do for yourself. This is where discernment comes in. This is where intuition comes in. But if you're going to just go with, these experiences, these mystical experiences or these near-death experiences as what is going to determine the truth for you about the afterlife or reality, then you're going to have trouble with that, because there's so many of them and so many of the details contradict one another, and it's just hard to. So that's why I say it's good to have an open heart, an open mind, and allow your own intuition to lead you into what you're going to believe. And then if you have mystical experiences for yourself, you determine, is that something that I can trust, and do I have this deep experiential knowing that comes with, that is a takeaway from the mystical experience, from the experience of transcendence or whatever it is. Okay, so I hope this was helpful. If you found this video helpful, informative, or insightful, please leave a thumbs up at the bottom of the screen, and be sure to subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.